Hello and welcome to this webinar entitled Leading and Engaging Remote Teams. My name is Corina Walsh. I'm the owner of Shift People Development Inc. And if you're not familiar with my work and you don't know who I am a certified professional coach. So when I'm not working one-on-one coaching leaders and business managers, I am doing team sessions where I help teams understand how to communicate and work together more effectively. And so since the recent shutdown and disruption that we've all been experiencing, I've been asked to deliver several of these webinars on how to lead and engage and communicate effectively with remote teams. So I'm very grateful to the CBA Chamber of Commerce for asking me to deliver this session to everyone today. The three core topics that we will talk about in today's session include: what does leadership look like right now? So essentially, we're asking and answering that question related to virtual leadership and leading a remote team. How to communicate with your remote team effectively, including what tools you could be using, and how to continue to engage employees during a time of uncertainty and disruption. So this is our situation right now. Our entire world has been turned upside down through no fault of our own, and we've been absolutely forced to adapt to this new reality. And I want to explain to you right now what happens to our mind and body, and what happens in our brain during a time of uncertainty. And the reason that I'm sharing this with you is so that you'll understand what's going on with your employees right now. If you're going to lead and manage your employees and lead and manage a remote team effectively right now, you need to understand what they might be experiencing. And it also might shed some light on how you're feeling and why you're feeling the way you're feeling right now, as well as you try to continue to lead and manage your organization. So during uncertainty, our brain interprets that uncertainty as danger and as a threat. And that I'm talking about the emotional part of our brain, that amygdala, the part of our brain where emotions come from. It's always, searching our environment and looking for threats. And if there is uncertainty, it is absolutely interpreted by the brain as a threat. And then what happens is that fear, so that uncertainty drives fear, and that fear will hijack our system. It will hijack our thinking brain, that prefrontal cortex, responsible for critical thinking and making decisions. And the emotions just override that thinking part of our brain, and it puts us on high alert. So essentially, it activates our fight or flight response, and we end up getting very, very reactive. And of course, we go into this survival mode, and suddenly a lot of energy, emotional energy, physical and even mental energy, is now being used up on survival. So you likely noticed that when everything started to shut down and we started to get wind that, this virus was sweeping the world, that people started running out and hoarding food and hoarding even things like toilet paper. And that is very much a fear-based response, that we have to go out and get enough resources for ourselves. People get stressed, people get tense, and then they have to do something to feel like they're in control and like they're preparing for what could be a bad situation. So whenever you see people behaving like that, it is definitely a fear-based reaction. And also what I want to tell you is that emotions are contagious. And we know from the research that negative emotions travel through an organization and through a building even faster than positive emotion. And so that's why when a few people start to get scared and start to get fearful, that spreads very, very quickly. And that's when you get that mass panic, like people running out and hoarding toilet paper. So again, the point of me telling you this is so that you understand what's happening right now with your employees. I'm wondering if you've noticed any fear-based reactions, responses, questions from them. Maybe they're getting a little more impatient, or, you might have noticed a change in behavior in any of your employees, and you have to understand what's going on in their mind and in their brain. And then not only are they worried about their jobs, but they're probably worried about family members as well. So we all have a lot going on right now. And you should also think about how you've been making decisions and how you've been communicating, and is it based on fear? And, a key thing that you can do to get yourself out of that fear hijack or that emotional hijack is to take a nice deep belly breath and say say out loud how you feel. So it's okay to admit out loud that you're feeling stressed, that you're feeling fearful because you don't know what's going to happen. And that's how you manage your emotions, so that your emotions aren't managing you. And this is what's going on now in all of our brains because of that uncertainty. So those of us who are able to manage the emotional aspect of that, we will cope a little more effectively. So you may even want to explain this to your employees to help them understand what's going on right now. You might be noticing that you're really tired, or maybe your employees are saying that they're really tired, and that's to be expected because, again, we're using up so much energy just on survival. So now that you know what's going on with anyone, you, your employees, your colleagues, in our minds and in our bodies right now because of this uncertainty, how can you continue to support your employees and still lead them through this time of uncertainty? Well, first and foremost, in order to help employees, you need to self-manage. You need to manage yourself first so you can help them manage. So just like I explained in the last slide, navigating your own emotions, taking a deep breath, saying out loud how you feel and what's coming up for you right now during this stressful time, and then sharing that technique with them and then helping them also say out loud how they feel so that maybe you can support them. But what's important to remember is that you have to show up as you would expect your employees to show up right now. And, recognizing that some of us might be coping better than others. Some of us might not be impacted very much at all by the situation. We're still high efficiency, whereas others might be really struggling maybe because of their family situation. So the better you can be at managing yourself, the better you'll be able to be to support your employees. You can also help employees feel a little safer by asking more questions and less telling. I'll speak in a moment about the importance of continuing to set expectations for your employees. But right now, in order to foster a greater sense of safety for your employees, it's important to take a breather and ask them what they need right now. What do they need from you? What are their expectations from you in supporting them as they continue to try and navigate and get their work done during this situation? So it's very common for people who are in a leadership role, managers, business owners, people running not-for-profit organizations, to do a lot of direction giving. Let's do this. Let's try this strategy, and try to keep the team going. And that's okay. But don't forget that you also have to listen and listen to what your employees are telling you about what's possible right now for them to get done in terms of their workload, and asking them what they need right now from you in terms of support. When you do that, when you ask employees what they need and listen to them, you start to foster that sense of psychological safety. Now, if you've never heard of this term psychological safety before, psychological safety is that sense of safety that we feel when we know we can show up as ourselves, as who we truly are, without any fear of negative consequences to our status or to our career. It means that we know we can speak up without fear of reprisal. So we can speak up right now and say, you know what, I'm really struggling and I'm not feeling like I can be as productive, and no one's going to hold it against us at work. We're not going to lose our jobs. And what we know from the research, Google did a ton of research on what makes an effective team. And what they discovered is that psychological safety is the number one thing that's essential for team performance. So how can you foster a little more psychological safety right now with your team? Well, I already mentioned it. Listening is the first step. Listening to what your employees need, what they're really telling you right now about what's going on for them. Your employees need to know that they are a member of this team right now. They might be wondering about the future of their employment with the organization, with the company. So they need to know, are they still a part of this team? Are they in the loop? Are you communicating with them and keeping them in the loop? I mentioned this one on the previous slide, but asking employees what they need right now, asking them what they have going on at home, what's manageable for them, what kind of support do they need, and can you involve employees in the decision making? Because again, when we're in a leadership role, it's very easy for us to step into that direction giving mode and we start telling everyone what to do. We take over. And in order to feel safe, employees need to know that they get a say. They have a voice. And they're the ones doing their job all along, and they're on the front lines. So they likely have ideas and they know what needs to get done. So if you can involve employees in the decision making, you'll definitely foster greater psychological safety. What's important to remember here is that psychological safety is eroded whenever there's uncertainty. And while none of us can really provide a level of certainty about when this whole situation will be over, you as their manager, their business owner, can do whatever you can to keep your employees in the loop and keep communicating with them about what's going on with the organization and try and create a little more psychological safety for them as best you can. This is definitely not the time for vague or inconsistent communication. You need to set up regular check-ins with your employees to keep them in the loop. And we'll talk more about that in just a moment. Empathy is also critical in terms of fostering psychological safety and in understanding how to lead your employees during a time of uncertainty. And this quote that you see on your screen, this is actually an activity that I do in my leadership development program. And I tell all the leaders in the room, I say, I have it on good authority that every one of your employees is doing the best they can with the tools they have. And I wait to see what type of reaction I'm going to get. And there's people that will dispute this with me and they'll say, there's no way my employees are doing their best. And maybe the other half of the room will say, yes, I think they probably are doing the best they can. And the truth is right now more than ever, we are all doing the best that we can with the tools and information that we have. And that includes you. So right now, what the type of leadership that's being called for is one that's very high in empathy. If you're a high efficiency person and you're coping very well right now, but perhaps you're starting to lose a little bit of patience with your coworkers or employees because they're not as high efficiency as you and high productivity, we have to remember that everybody's coping differently and everyone is handling this differently. So hold on to that empathy as best you can. This is not necessarily a time for setting higher expectations, for starting new projects. It's a time for asking, what's realistic right now? And how do we maintain rather than, achieve higher standards right now? It isn't necessarily the time to expect more, but a time to ask employees, how do they need to be supported so that we can simply maintain? One of the upsides of uncertainty is that the priorities often rise to the top. And this is definitely a time when you talk to your employees and say, what are the priorities right now? And how can we best serve with what's possible right now? In terms of supervising employees remotely, I want you to remember that you still have to set expectations, maybe more so now than ever. You need to almost over communicate a little bit right now, as opposed to when, things were normal. But these expectations have to be through a different lens. These expectations have to be viewed through the lens of this question: what does this make possible now? What I'm talking about when I say this, I'm talking about this situation of disruption and shutdowns and isolation. What does this situation that we're in right now make possible? And again, this is what I mentioned just a minute ago about the priorities beginning to rise in this time of uncertainty. So it means, asking employees what's going on for them at home, what can they manage right now in terms of their workload, and co-create those expectations with your employees so that they feel empowered, they feel they have some autonomy, and they're involved in the decision making. And that's what can help you foster that sense of psychological safety. And it's also going to help you engage your employees. So don't stop setting expectations or delegating, but we also have to be flexible with our expectations because there's a new realism. There's a new situation that we're faced with right now. So we have to be realistic about that. You need to ask your employees how often they need a check-in from you. And most of the teams that I've been working with are doing daily check-ins via Zoom. But, maybe some of your employees might need more, some might need less. Depends on how self-sufficient your employees are. It depends on how good your management practices were before this happened and how independent your employees feel. So the best thing to do is ask your employees, do we need daily check-ins? Do we need to check in every second day or multiple times throughout the day? You ask your employees how often they want to communicate with you and on what platform. And I'll talk about the platform in a moment when we talk about the technical side of communication. And something else that I've been reminding my clients about right now is that what you need to consider is that it's really a time for productivity over presence. And what I mean by presence is that if you have employees working at home, then it's not a time to expect them to be connected to their computers all day, 9 to 5, like in a normal work situation. What would be more effective in terms of supervising employees right now is setting productivity goals. Here's what we need to get done. When do you think it can get done by? What's realistic? And, if that takes you 2 hours and then that's it, you can take the rest of the day off, or you can take a 2-hour break because I know the kids are at home with you and it's hard. Think about doing work in certain chunks of time so that you can get it done and not expecting each other to be at our laptops, to be at our computers all day. Because I know that a lot of what I've heard from a lot of my clients that I've been speaking with is that they're overworking. They're not feeling as productive because they're working at home, and therefore they're putting in longer hours. And that is really not effective for managing burnout and for building resilience. So keep that in mind, productivity over presence. Another factor in terms of supervising your team remotely is that it's helpful if you empower your team to be their own personal managers. And what I'm talking about there is that you are not there physically in the workplace with your employees anymore. So there has to be a lot of self-management going on for them. And you can empower them by asking them, to recognize when they're at their most productive. When can you get your work done? And not expecting the typical 9 to 5 schedule that we're used to. So empower that self-management, lead by example, let employees know that you trust them, and ask them what they think they should do instead of solving the problem for them, so that you can encourage them to solve some of their own problems because you're not there with them. And so this is really an opportunity to build up some of those skills in your employees as well. I would also remind you that it's okay to set boundaries around work hours. And in fact, I encourage you to do that. Again, a lot of my clients are telling me they're overworking, but some of my clients are telling me that because some people are night owls and they prefer to work at night, now they have employees who have to work in the day, but these night owls, the people who like to work at night, they're emailing and texting all hours of the night, and people who work in the day feel obligated to respond. So you have to address that if you see that happening, and you have to remind your employees that, it's okay to have boundaries. You can schedule emails. If you want to prepare the emails and prepare communication at night, but schedule it so it goes out in the morning. Respect each other's boundaries right now, so we don't create conflict and so we don't burn each other out, most importantly. This is a question I've been asking on all the webinars that I have been delivering. Can we expect the same level of productivity from everyone right now? And most of the answers that I have been getting is no, absolutely not. And I agree 100%. I don't think it's fair for us to expect the same level of productivity. I've heard some people argue that, well, we're working from home. We don't have all these distractions like there are in the workplace, but we have all these new distractions of working from home, and our kids are home with us. And maybe we're trying to navigate working at home with our spouse who's also working from home. And on top of that, we have this huge mental and emotional stress because we don't know what's happening. We don't know what's going on. And we might be worried about family members and keeping everyone safe as well. I don't think this is a time to expect the same level of productivity. So remember, If you are a high efficiency person, if you're coping very well right now, that's good, but have that empathy for your coworkers who may not be coping as well and aren't quite as productive. So getting back to communication, you really need to decide amongst your team what the right communication tool is for your team. And there are so many that you can use. A lot of smaller teams are text messaging. They might have internal messaging systems. I use Slack, and I've encouraged a lot of my clients to start using Slack. Some people are, using Zoom or just picking up the phone. You really have to ask yourself, what am I trying to communicate here, and what's the best platform to communicate that on? So if it's something sensitive that you have to say, it's likely better to pick up the phone or try and get someone on a Zoom call so you can at least see each other's face. If you're communicating as a team, you might want a tool like Slack, because you can get everyone in on the conversation, and you can go back and check check the feed and see what the conversation was about. And we will talk about some of the best practices for using those tools. Again, Slack is hugely popular right now. I use it, and I encourage my clients to use it because you can have different channels on Slack. You can tag people, and it's just a really efficient tool. You can have different teams can have their own Slack channels for different conversations. So I encourage my clients to have a channel on Slack for recognition and doing shout outs. So that stuff the good news stuff doesn't get mixed up with the really important stuff. You can have a separate channel for the jokes and the funny stuff, because when that stuff starts to get mixed up with the important messages, it can get frustrating for people. So Slack is a really effective communication tool. And if you need something that organizes tasks and work functions and projects, I highly recommend looking into Trello or Asana. I run my business off Trello. Heather Howard of the CBA Chamber has, showed me how to use Trello. She's done training on Trello. And it's a very, very effective tool. You can color code tasks. You can have to-do lists. You can manage entire projects on Trello. And you can color code things and assign tasks to different people and check off everything as you're going. So if you need something visual that you can all be a part of, because you can all log in and look at the same Trello boards, I highly recommend that. Trello and Asana are essentially the same thing. They're just designed a little bit differently. So you have to figure out which one will be effective for you to use. So now more than ever, it's important for you to be cognizant of how you're communicating online. Online communication is much more difficult to understand because we don't have the cues. We don't have the emotional cues. We don't have the facial expressions and the body language to go with the communication. So make sure you're communicating clearly. Reread that text, reread that email. Use the emojis if you have to communicate intention so that someone doesn't misunderstand it. Online communication, text messages and emails are often misunderstood because we can't pick up on those cues. So make sure you're communicating what your intention is there. If you're going to use something like Slack, it's worth your while to take 15 or 20 minutes to learn the Slack commands. It'll help you be a more efficient and effective communicator. My only issue with Slack and any type of messenger is that the feed can get really, really long after a while. So it can be difficult to go back and see what someone said and what was I supposed to do about that. That's why I recommend using different channels for different types of conversations so you can keep things short and simple. And ask yourself, are you answering questions, communicating clearly? It's nothing worse than when an employee emails their manager several questions and only 2 questions get answered out of 4. Or it's a simple yes or no, but you get this big explanation otherwise. That kind of doesn't really answer the question. So don't add to your employees' frustration right now by not communicating effectively. And if you're unsure if you're communicating effectively, ask your employees, how can I be communicating better with you right now? What are my bad communication habits? And how can I make this easier on all of us in terms of communication? So our last section here in this webinar is about engaging employees. And it probably feels like it's even more difficult now to engage employees now that you're physically not together. But what I would encourage you to do is to make sure that you continue to provide recognition to your employees. Hopefully you had some type of system or program for recognition before this started, but if you didn't, that's okay. What I would encourage you to do is at the end of the day, send your employees a quick little specific message about how they impacted your work, how they helped today, how they impacted customers or clients today. If you use Slack, that's a great place to initiate a separate channel just for shout outs and good news stories, because we need it now more than ever. So don't stop providing recognition to your employees. In fact, we need it now more than ever, because recognition will help us guard against burnout. We burn out faster if we don't feel like our effort is being recognized, if we don't hear that our effort is being recognized. So we need recognition more than ever. It will help guard against burnout. It will help engage and retain employees. My final thoughts on employee engagement here are that employees are engaged when their leaders continuously provide insight and clarity to the situation at hand. Now that's difficult right now because you don't have a lot of insight or clarity into the situation at hand. And you know what? It's okay for you to say that. It's okay for you to admit that to your employees and demonstrate that vulnerability. It will make them trust you more. But what you do know, when you know it, you have to communicate it with them as soon as possible. You have to bring your team together and say, what does this make possible now? What is our plan now? What do you see as our ability to move forward with this? And communicate as often and as clearly as you can to keep your employees engaged. A final reflection activity I would like for you to do is that I want you to think that imagine that it's 6 months from now and this is all over. And you're looking back on this entire situation. Who do you want to have been? How do you want to remember yourself and see yourself as going through this situation right now? What personal values were at play for you, and what kind of leader did you want to be right now? So think about that for a few moments, jot a few words down. And I've asked this question of every organization that I've done this webinar for, and most people say they want to be compassionate, they want to have empathy, patience, they just want to be there for their employees. So think about that. Who do you want to have been 6 months from now when you look back on this entire situation? And whatever your answer, keep that posted somewhere so that on the tough days when you're about to lose your patience or when you're having a hard time, you can look at those words and remember who you said you wanted to be right now. I want to thank you so much for attending this webinar. And again, one final thank you to the CBA Chamber of Commerce for asking me to deliver this session. I hope it was of value to you. Feel free to reach out to me via the contact information that you see on the screen. Corina Walsh, it's Corina@shiftpt.com. I'll answer any of your questions. If you have any other topics that you'd like to see covered in a webinar, a video, or blog post that I can do for you, I'm happy to do that. And again, thank you so much for being here. And I hope you are safe and healthy wherever you are.